Okay. Hi, Joan and Jane. How are you?
Good.
Hello. Good. How are you?
Okay, which one's Joan, which one's Jane?
Joan. Jane.
Jane, okay. Obviously, you guys are identical twins, and as we were talking about before we got on, this is a first for this show, so this is really interesting. Is it true about identical twins that although you look exactly alike, your personalities are yin and yang?
Yes. And that's where all the fighting and the arguing comes from. Absolutely.
Is it also true that you guys have telepathic powers between you?
Joan has the telepathic powers towards me. I don't seem to have it as much.
That's because I think I care more for people.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. I've also heard in some instances with identical twins that if one feels or experiences physical pain, the other one could feel it. Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, that would be me again. I had her morning sickness. She was pregnant, living in another state. I felt that the Immaculate Conception could be true because I was with nobody back then. And I thought, I'm definitely pregnant. I actually kept going to the grocery store to get the tests. And finally, she called and said she was pregnant, and the nausea went away.
So you guys call yourselves the therapy twins. Yeah? Okay, why is that? What do you do?
We used to be therapists.
We're retired therapists trying to do something with social media now.
Well, we're trying to help masses because, after 36 years of being a nurse, she's been a nurse longer than me, but after 36 years, I don't think I could sit in a room alone with somebody to hear them vent for very long. I'd be like, woohoo, let's go here. It's way better doing it together with Jane. It doesn't feel like work doing it with Jane.
So you would have patients come in and you both would sit there?
That was towards the end. In the beginning, it was individual.
Right.
She'd have her clients,
Yes.
I'd have mine. We'd swap every so often because the clients themselves
Yes.
would say, you know what, I want to hear what Jane has to say about this.
The clients actually started asking for both of us. They loved the different perspectives. They also loved a quick twin fight if we had one in the waiting room.
Yep.
But they really liked hearing both of our perspectives and, who experienced what and this and that. So we started doing it together and people loved it.
Yeah, and it became a comedy show as well, apparently.
It's a novel idea. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
No, I mean, we hear of two heads are better than one, but we never think of mental illness and helping people with two heads.
No, and this would be like, what sort of therapy? Couples therapy?
Family and couples didn't necessarily have to be husband, wife. It could have been, mother, daughter, et cetera, things like that.
Friends.
And then sometimes the individual wanted both of us in there as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, especially if they didn't like what their therapist was saying.
Yeah, they would say,
Want the other do.
yeah. They said, I hear you, Jane, but can we just get Joan in here, please?
Yeah.
So you said now you're doing online. What are you doing? Are you doing a podcast or?
Well, we started a podcast, but we both are so hard on ourselves that at one point, Jane just got up and said, this is so boring. I'm out of here. So those are going to be bloopers, after a while. But mostly we're guests because we just retired and we are so burnt. We're like toast over here. So we're going to be actually doing more like seminars, colleges, just speaking for people to recognize their mental illness early so that it doesn't go from here to, a huge problem. Just nip it like a cut. Get bacitracin on that cut quick, or air, whatever, coconut oil.
Not to mention, nobody wants an assignment. Even myself, when I was in therapy, thank goodness my therapist didn't give out assignments because I wouldn't do them. And it was, you go so long, you vent and talk about this and that, but, you never really get off the boat and do. And so one of the things about our book was we felt like sharing, as well as online, we like to share some of the little tidbits that helped us and hopefully can help others. And they're, they're fun. They're fun little techniques.
Real simple, because if they're hard, who's going to do it?
Well, that's true. Now, you mentioned the word mental illness a couple of times. And before we got on, you also mentioned your age. I wanted to bring that up because we're both in the same age group. the term mental illness has evolved over time. Back 30, 40 years ago, a lot of things were considered mental illnesses that are not now.
Exactly.
And I'm happy for that. Particularly, there was one, I think up until 1972, they considered homosexuality a mental illness.
I actually had a client, he's actually passed away a few years ago, but I had a client that actually went for therapy to change to a heterosexual.
Wow.
And of course, it didn't work.
No, that's just scary. I've seen some of those films that they've made, Pray the Gay Away, and there's a couple of different organizations, and it's just unbelievable. And they do this to kids, to teenagers. You know. So going back to mental illness, as you mentioned, what are you considering to be mental illness, and what are you doing to help people?
What we found is one of the commonalities with most mental illness is some kind of trauma. And what we like to do is just say, you know what, everybody experiences trauma to varying degrees is the reaction. And not always does it land you up into a hospital and on medication. I mean, it could, and those are all wonderful things that can be very helpful. But what we thought was if everybody experiences trauma, and we're not into a lot of labels. I mean, I've carried a couple of diagnoses myself, and we just kind of wanted to broaden it to all humans experience some kind of trauma, and we don't have to put a label on it. And then here are some of the things that can help.
Because before we get into that, within psychiatry, they would say you have depression, you have anxiety, oh, you can't sleep, you have insomnia, all three of which would come from a trauma. And, you know, you didn't heal from the trauma within 6 months. Therefore, now you have all these cluster of symptoms, and we treat it with all kinds of different things when if we would just address the trauma, no matter how small or large it is, if you considered it to be devastating, then I don't care if it was really tiny, then you still, everyone gets treated similarly with that. But as soon as you put on it, people are like, oh my God. And now, I don't know, they're considered crazy, and I don't know, it's awful. And then
They're the identified patient,
Yeah.
their identified family member. And then if they have a kid who starts acting a little bit like them, and now we're all diagnosing the children, it just goes on and on and on. And, you know, we had an uncle who passed away from colon cancer before it was in vogue. And he suffered a trauma at his place of employment with heavy machinery right before the diagnosis. And there was a brilliant psychiatrist that we both we worked with, we really respected, and he did a lot of research with schizophrenia. And we had the opportunity to hang out with him during the interviewing process. And he always dug deep, always looking for a trauma, a childhood trauma that could have bounced the patient into such a severe disorder.
Did he find it?
Every time I sat with him, he did.
Yeah, every time. If you dig deep enough, I mean, Jane had a client. I mean, we would laugh so hard because he really, no matter what you mentioned, nope, it went well. You know, oh, a really bad divorce. No, my parents got along really well. It was easy. And, you know, you never got spanked. You never got yelled at. It was hilarious. So maybe he didn't have a trauma except for circumcision. I do believe, because I've witnessed circumcision at birth, and there's no stuff for no more ouchies. They don't do
anesthetic.
A thing except
maybe they do now, though.
And the baby screaming. Oh yeah, that was 30 years ago, I guess. Anyway, I lost my train of thought.
Well, we went from mental illness to circumcision all in one.
Well, you thought that was quite traumatic,
Right?
Yes, I'm sure.
Oh, because some people try to say they've never been through trauma. That's all.
Well,
and then we up the elk. You know, the elk's running, and then the tiger got one of them, didn't kill it. Does the elk die? No, but the tribe took the elk back and nurtured him or her, and, you know, whatever. She can resolve PTSD. That's the first time I'm saying that. She can resolve that trauma, or he, because they have the community support. We don't really have that today.
We don't have community support for what?
if you've gone through
people.
something.
How about for people?
Yeah, just for anybody.
Years ago, we always learned that most trauma, if you had met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, that most of it actually resolves within 3 months. And if it doesn't resolve in 3 months, or 3 to 6 months, that's when you start with some treatment.
Yeah.
Which does not always have to be medication.
No.
Well, let's talk a little bit about medication, particularly antipsychotics and antidepressants. Those have been on the market probably for the last 50 years, 40 years, somewhere in there. Before that, they did wonderful things like lobotomies and electroshock therapies for people. On the other hand, depending on the severity of the mental illness, people could become dependent on these drugs for the rest of their life. What do you think about these drugs? I mean, good, bad?
Do they work? Sometimes they work. Sometimes they're a magic bullet, but do they last? In my experience, no. If somebody says they've been on that medicine for, 25 years or 30 years, it's about time to either change, do a little work, maybe to get off that medicine. There are a few people that are going to need it because they're unable to or unwilling to change their lifestyle, or really they are unable to. But they really do come with some side effects that may not go away.
When the Prozacs came out, they were a miracle. They sort of replaced some older ones that had a lot of cardiac side effects. And it just seemed like we do, at least in this country, is we've turned into a pill nation. So everybody wants a pill, even if they didn't meet the full criteria for a major depressive episode or something else. Myself included, I was on antidepressants for years, and they helped me an awful lot. I did have to switch every 3 to 4 years to a different one. It seemed to have a wear-off effect. And nowadays, everybody's on the newer antipsychotics. They're called atypical antipsychotics. So they treat a whole range. In fact, they pretty much treat everything in psychiatry. And in low doses, they seem to be quite benign. Some of the newer ones haven't been out long enough for us to know long-term data. But, they do work for a lot of people. And for some people that they don't work at all, we do have electric shock, which has come a long, long way since the barbaric days. Thank goodness we don't really do lobotomies anymore. There's that other, they have another one, transmagnetic stimulation. Now we've got things coming out, people are going to try ketamine. I noticed that a lot of states are doing research. They're bringing back the psychedelic drugs like LSD and stuff to do research on, to try to get that magic bullet.
I have heard the research being done with LSD, and it's interesting because they're giving people just these minute doses of it.
Yes.
And apparently they've had some very positive results with it being able to focus people with attention deficit syndrome.
Go with the natural, try the natural first, and then go with the synthetic. German doctors, I read, actually prescribe rosemary essential oil for pain, whereas we go straight to the opioid.
Right.
And I up rosemary because I broke my foot a few years ago, and it mimicked the chemical nature of rosemary, mimicked an old pain med. It's not even that old. It sounds dirty. It's called a COX-2 inhibitor, but it's COX-2 inhibitor. But rosemary essential oil is that. So I used to use it for my foot pain, and it worked.
And in certain Asian countries, they use a multi-mushroom extract for cancer, and they also do chemo and radiation, but they don't just have someone eating a processed food diet thinking that you're going to get healthy. So with psychiatry too, I mean, and we know, we've been in the business for so long, some of the patients that their outcomes aren't that great. If you really look at their lifestyle in terms of their food quality, do they get any movement, like exercise? They
don't have enough money to enjoy anything.
They really don't have the what we like to say, body, mind, and spirit, or body, mind, and soul, whichever one's acceptable to Joan. it takes all three to get better.
And I think on that note, we do have to wrap it up. We are out of time, unfortunately. Do you guys have a website that you want to give out?
It's just therapytwins.com, one word.
Okay, great.
All lowercase, yeah.
And Joan knows Instagram and Twitter.
All of it, just Therapy Twins, one word.
Therapytwins.com, and links to your social media and everything's on there.
Yes. Keep it simple.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was fun. Best of luck.
Thank you.